I'm going to ask the panel's indulgence for a moment. I have some questions, but before I get to them, Senator Cardin just arrived, and I'd like to have him come up and testify, if that's okay with you. Then we'll call you back up, if that's all right. So if you don't mind taking a seat in the first row, and then I'll call up Senator Cardin, who has been a champion on the Magnitsky issue, and who has put human rights front and center on this whole discussion of PNTR for Russia. I very much appreciate his leadership, and look forward to his testimony. I just say, Ben, just kind of as a preface, one of the things people were talking about about the legislation is that, you know, that in the bill there is the ability for the administration, in cases of national security, to use a classified annex for the names of people who are guilty of corruption and human rights violations. But the hope is, and I think at least there's a bipartisan hope, that will not be abused, that will be used as a last resort, because I think part of the power of this bill is when you name people, you shame them. And even if we can't count on justice in a particular country, in this case Russia, one would like them to know that the world knows that they're guilty of these abuses. And my hope is that at a minimum that the administration, once this all passes, will put the killers of Sergei Magnitsky in the public realm and not in a classified annex. So anyway, having said that, I appreciate all of your leadership and your inspiration, and you have done amazing things, and you've been a great leader on this, and I welcome you here and look forward to your testimony.
Chairman McGovern, first of all, thank you very much for all of your leadership. It really is a pleasure to be here to talk about the issues of what is happening in Russia today, and specifically talk about the Magnitsky legislation. But I thank you very much for your leadership. The development of the Magnitsky legislation, you were critical as we worked together in both the House and Senate to have legislation advance. There were significant interests trying to prevent this discussion, particularly in relationship to the permanent normal trade relations, and I applaud your leadership on this. I should point out that I think my last trip to Russia was with Tom Lantos. And it was interesting, he was harassed coming into Russia, so it's an appropriate subject we have today. I also come here as the Senate Chair of the Helsinki Commission, and I must tell you, I think Russia represents the greatest disappointment of progress that we thought would be taking place over the last 2 decades. 2 decades ago, there was such promise, and we were really optimistic of reform within Russia. It's a critically important country internationally, and yet we're extremely disappointed to see the backtracking within Russia as it relates to human rights, the ability to express your views and to associate, for opposition to have an effective voice in criticizing their government, for journalists to be safe and be able to report objectively what is happening, and of course for whistleblowers being able to act on information they have in order to bring it to the attention of authorities without fear of being in danger. All that we have seen a regression within Russia on protecting human rights. So it's an area of major interest and where we need to make additional improvements. It's very interesting, this past week in Baltimore, my hometown, we celebrated the 25th anniversary of the Washington March for Soviet Jewry. Natan Sharansky was in Baltimore, Elie Wiesel was there. We had a chance to talk about the ability of the United States, through the use of Jackson Vanik and other tools, to put a spotlight on the plight of Soviet Jews. And it worked. Policies were changed. People were allowed to leave the former Soviet Union as a result of the leadership that the United States exercised during that period of time. I think the information concerning Mr. Magnitsky is well known, so I'm not going to go through all of the specifics. It has been a major issue of interest in the U.S. Helsinki Commission because it put a face on the many abuses that were taking place within Russia. But this was the most egregious. The facts are very well known about a young lawyer who discovered major corruption in representing his client. He did what was responsible. He brought that to the attention of the authorities. As a result, he was arrested, he was tortured, he was denied medical care, and he died in prison. The third anniversary will take place tomorrow on November 16th. And Mr. Magnitsky will not be forgotten. Sergei Magnitsky represents what we want to see changed within Russia. As a result of that tragedy, after the facts became very well known, you in the House, I in the Senate, introduced legislation to do something which I thought made a lot of sense. First, it said, look, the corrupt officials are doing this in order to enrich themselves. We can deny them the opportunity to keep their money in our country. They don't want rubles, they want dollars. We can deny them the opportunity to visit our country where many of their family members are taking advantage of our schools and they like to visit. So these are privileges that we have in the United States. So our legislation was pretty clear, and that is for these people who are involved in the death of Mr. Magnitsky and the cover-up of Mr. Magnitsky, they shouldn't be given the benefits of our country from visiting and using our banking system. It also showed the international community that the United States was prepared to lead. And as you know, there are many countries around the world that have followed the U.S. leadership and have considered and passed similar legislation and are prepared to follow the U.S. on this issue. I know that the House is prepared to vote on this bill tomorrow, and I'm very encouraged by that. I strongly support it. I do want to point out why I feel very strongly that we should make this bill global, and it shouldn't be specific just to the Magnitsky circumstance. I use by way of comparison what was done with the passage of the Jackson-Vanik law. It was clearly aimed at the Soviet Union. There's no question about it. That was the country that was denying Jews the right to emigrate. It was clearly motivated and passed because of the Soviet Union. But the Jackson-Vanik law was global. It didn't apply to just one country. It applied to all non-market economy countries. So I think it gives us an opportunity to go beyond just this one example. And as it relates to Russia, what happens when the next human rights violations occur in that country? Are those perpetrators going to be allowed to visit our country and use our banking system? We should be able to have a more global tool available to advance human rights. And I need not tell you that human rights violations are not just in Russia. There are other countries that are notorious for their violations of human rights. And yes, our Secretary of State can take action on an individual case today. I understand that. It's difficult, though. And it's difficult to use our banking system to deny the ability. And it's difficult to get other countries to act unless we show leadership. So I would urge us to take advantage of the opportunity we have now and to improve this bill by making it global. This is not a partisan issue. John Kyle and I authored an op-ed yesterday on this issue. John, we have strong bipartisan support in the United States Senate. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the Senate Finance Committee has approved versions of this bill unanimously that includes the global provisions. I don't think it's controversial, and I still hope we will be able to do this. Let me just address one or two other points as it relates to the Magnitsky legislation. I hear frequently that this is interference with the prerogatives of local governments. And let me tell you something. We want Russia to act. We want countries where their citizens have violated internationally recognized human rights standards that they should take action. And if they did take action, there would be no need for us to consider this type of legislation. The problem is that human rights violators in many countries are not held accountable. And that's the reason for this type of legislation. The Helsinki Accords not only give us a right, but really provides, I think, a responsibility for every country within the OSCE to be able to challenge the rights of other countries that are out of step with their commitments. So we have the international right to challenge what's happening in Russia as it violates their commitments under the Helsinki Accords. This has been well established from the days that Dante Fascell chaired the U.S. Helsinki Commission and Steny Hoyer. We have been probably the most vocal country. Our U.S. Helsinki Commission has perhaps been the most open, and it's been not limited to one country. We have been critical in many countries, including the United States, when we believed we were out of compliance with responsibilities that we have under the Helsinki Accord. I also want to point out that we're not alone in wanting this legislation move forward as far as voices within Russia is concerned. I've heard substantial support, including people who have come to my office to lobby me to get this bill done from citizens within Russia. As they've said to me, Russia can not only do better, must do better for its own people. And then lastly, this is appropriate to be considered within the PNTR for Russia. It is appropriate for us when we are talking about opening up economic opportunities to look at the human rights records within a country. We did that for Jackson Vanik, and it's right to do here for the Magnitsky legislation. What we've done here is basically modernize a human rights tool. The Jackson Vanik is no longer relevant to today's human rights challenges. Magnitsky is relevant to today's human rights challenges, and it's directed towards the individual rather than a country, but a country can do something about it by holding that individual accountable. So I hope we will take full advantage of the opportunity to advance human rights, not only in Russia, but globally. This is an important moment, and I look forward to the House's action on the Magnitsky bill, and I am very hopeful that the Senate will be able to take this issue up prior to the end of this Congress.
Well, thank you very much. I agree with absolutely everything you said. As you know, the original bill we introduced here in the House was global in its reach, and I hope we can get there. If not immediately, I look forward to working with you to get there because it does make sense to me. But again, thank you for your leadership on this. I know you have other things to go to, but please know that that your lead over in the Senate has been a great inspiration to us over in the House, and we value very much your efforts on this.
Likewise for your leadership. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, if I can call the other panel back up one more time, if that's okay. I just have a few questions, and then we can wrap up here because I know your time is valuable. But I just wanted to get a few things in. Ms. Cork, you mentioned, you talked about the whole USAID flap in Russia. I just wanted to get you on the record. How do you view the statement by the Russian Foreign Ministry in September of 2012 that USAID was attempting to influence elections in Russia and was improperly carrying out its humanitarian aid programs in the North Caucasus region? And what are the implications of USAID's ouster for Russian civil society groups? And what is your assessment of the U.S. response? You touched on that briefly. And how can the U.S. continue to effectively support Russian civil society groups?
Thank you for that question. USAID had been in Russia for 20 years, supporting a wide variety of groups, a wide variety of civil society actors. The Russian government's contention that they're meddling in internal affairs, they signed up to the Helsinki Accords, which means that the protection of rights inside the country is of concern. Monitoring the support that was provided, for example, to USAID by USAID to Golos to monitor the Russian elections. There's a need to have the Russian mindset change. The fact that they're holding the government accountable, that they're adding transparency into the system, that civil society is working to have better governance, to have more independent media organizations. These are things that should be welcomed by the Russian government. The fact that they have a young, prosperous generation that now is more invested and came out to the streets saying that they care about the future of Russia. Those are things that the government should be embracing. Instead, it decided to clamp down on those things. As far as what the U.S. Support can do now, that's something that will become increasingly more difficult, and that's why Freedom House is very critical of how quickly that decision went down. The Russian government effectively said, we would like you out of the country, ceasing programs by October 1st, and they asked that in mid-September, rather than having this be a public conversation, open to public debate, challenging back. USAID is ceasing operations. And a big question will be how to move forward now. The U.S. government has said that they will continue support to civil society organizations. I hope that remains true. The challenge now with all these other laws, the foreign agent law, how will they be able to provide assistance to groups, particularly those that we know the Russian government sees as enemies, those that seek to have accountability for human rights? How will we continue support to those groups? I know that a variety of different mechanisms are being considered, but with USAID no longer in the country and the signal that the Russian government is saying that they're okay with some things, but they're certainly not okay with anything having to do with human rights, it will require sustained focus from the U.S. It will require enormous creativity. It will require working with the Europeans, and making sure that there is support that's still going to civil society in Russia, including to human rights organizations.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Mr. Browder, as you heard me just say, I agree with everything Senator Cardin just said. I mean, again, our bill was originally global in scope, and it's now narrowed down to Russia. Hopefully we can get it back to global, whether it's going to be on the Russia PNTR bill or another bill. I'm not sure. I mean, the important thing is not to hold things up. I think we need to move this process forward. And I think it's also fair to say that the mere passing of the Magnitsky law, that's not enough. I mean, we need the implementation of that law. And again, I think one of the first tests is going to be whether or not the administration puts on the list, on the public list, those who were responsible for killing Sergei Magnitsky. I think that would be a powerful statement in and of itself that, in fact, the administration is seriously about implementing this law. Again, this is not just about the Magnitsky case. This bill goes a lot wider and broader than that, but it seems to me that that is a very, that to me should be an expected first step. And I think there is bipartisan, I think, consensus that at a minimum should happen, and we will clarify tomorrow, I think, during the debate in a colloquy, what the congressional intent is with regard to the classified annex. It is not meant to just hide everything. That is not the intention of Congress. That will be made clear in a colloquy on the House floor tomorrow. But we want to let the sunshine in a little bit. I think that's good for Russia. It's good for those in Russia and those in the Russian government who want reform. I just wanted to put that on the record. You know, impunity for politically motivated killings is a major problem in Russia. The European Court of Human Rights has heard many individual cases, and in fact, Mr. Magnitsky's mother filed a complaint with the court last month. I guess my question is, how do Russian courts react to rulings of the European Court of Human Rights? What can be done to professionalize the Russian judiciary? And do you believe that Russian attorneys, by and large, strive to meet the professional international standards, or do you believe that corruption prevents most courts from effectively implementing legal norms?
Well, first of all, the European Court for Human Rights is it's a great institution in concept. But as we looked at seeking justice for Sergei Magnitsky, we said to ourselves, what happens, what's a success at the European Court for Human Rights? And a success at the European Court for Human Rights is somewhere between, at the very minimum, 2 years, and more likely 5 to 7 years, you get to hear your cases adjudicated. During your adjudication, you're quite likely to win if you've been abused, because there have been so many positive judgments in favor of plaintiffs. And then when you win, you get a monetary award of maybe 20,000 euros, maybe 50,000 euros at a top end against the Russian state. The people who committed the crime are not prosecuted, and that's not justice by any measure by any measure. And that is the only sort of court outside of Russia that allows people to get at least some kind of official court judgment. The courts in Russia have something like a 99.7% conviction rate. The judges are absolutely not independent, and there's nothing that one can do to professionalize it if there is essentially no independence of the judiciary system and no rule of law per se. And I don't believe it's changeable unless the people who are running the country are no longer the same people running the country. I don't think it's going to change in the current regime. I don't think one can say, please guys start behaving yourself, and they'll say, oh, okay, I didn't realize I wasn't behaving myself. The one thing that will make these people change slightly is the consequence of misbehaving, which is why I'm so proud to be connected to you and your efforts in making the first real consequence since the Jackson-Vanik Act for people who abuse human rights. That is something that they pay attention to, and they pay attention to it. Well, I think you now have recognized how much they pay attention to it, which is extreme. This is the single scariest thing that can happen to them, which is if they are living in a world of absolute impunity, and all of a sudden you create a punishment, they're no longer living in that world of impunity.
Just for the record, I mean, I think it's important to state, I mean, those who were involved in Sergei Magnitsky's murder, I mean, have they suffered any consequences? I mean, have they been ostracized? Have they been publicly humiliated? Have they been, fined? Has anything at all happened to these individuals?
Officially, they've been, so that there are 60 people, as of 2 years ago, we came up a list of 60 people that we presented to the U.S. Helsinki Commission that they vetted, who were involved one way or another in either his false arrest, torture, and death, or the crimes that he discovered. And of those 60 people, 59 of them have been fully exonerated of having committed any crimes in spite of the documentary evidence to the contrary. A number of them have been promoted, and some of them even were awarded special honors. That's the official response. However, thankfully, Russia is an authoritarian state and not a totalitarian state. Not thankfully it's authoritarian, but thankfully it's not totalitarian. And being an authoritarian state, there are little pockets of goodness. You see the pockets of goodness sitting up here on the panel with me today of people who are allowed, or have been allowed up till now, to tell the truth, to say what's going on, to make people aware. And there are pockets of truth and goodness inside the Russian community that are working in the press that tell these stories. And as a result of that, the people who killed Sergei Magnitsky are well known. Everybody knows who they are in Russia, and they are famous in Russia, not in a good way. They're famous in a bad way. And thankfully, and it's because of naming and shaming, because of what you and Senator Cardin did, that they're famous. And because they're famous in a bad way, their lives are changed forever, which is that that their neighbors don't look at them with any respect. Their neighbors look at them as who they are. And so that is the consequence, and that will hopefully continue to be the consequence for Magnitsky's killers and other gross human rights violators if the lists are public, and we can fight for that when this law gets passed.
Thank you. Ms. Lakshina, the European Court of Human Rights has heard many individual cases on Russia's counter-terrorist operations in the North Caucasus, and Russia is bound by its judgments. What obstacles, if any, do applicants face in bringing cases before this court? How do Russian courts react to the rulings of the European Court of Human Rights? And to what extent are these rulings implemented? What other options exist for bringing Russian officials involved in human rights violations in the North Caucasus to justice?
Thank you very much for this question. In fact, I would like to emphasize once again that the European Court on Human Rights delivered over 210 rulings on Chechnya cases alone. And out of all of those rulings, not a single one has been fully and effectively implemented. The rulings are about cases of enforced disappearances, extrajudicial executions, abductions, unlawful deprivation of property, and so on and so forth. What happens in each and every case is that, first and foremost, the court emphasizes this total lack of effective investigation on domestic level. Because before coming to the European Court on Human Rights, the victims and their family members, they literally knock on every door, craving justice. And without any domestic remedy available to them whatsoever, they finally come to Strasbourg, and years later, roughly 5 to 7 years later, like Mr. Browder here says, they get their rulings. But once the ruling is in place, all that they can actually claim from the Russian authorities is the monetary compensation. And it's not the money that they went to Strasbourg for. Because those 30 to 100,000 euros that are essentially awarded as a financial compensation to a mother who lost her son to an enforced disappearance years ago and does not even have the luxury of burying his body is more of an offense. It's basically nothing at all. And so there is no justice yet, despite the rulings, because even in those cases where it is absolutely clear and even indicated in relevant judgments by the European Court who the individual perpetrators are, or which particular military or police detachments the individual perpetrators belong with, those perpetrators are not held to account. Just to give you one example, in a most prominent Strasbourg case on Chechnya, a well-known Russian general clearly gave orders to shoot a prisoner dead, not only in presence of multiple witnesses, but also in presence of a CNN stringer who actually filmed the whole scene, and it was shown on television time and again. And that still did not enable the Russian authorities to punish the general. In fact, he suffered no sanctions at all.
There's one final question from Ms. Lisova. What is the Russian government doing to stem the tide of violence in different parts of the North Caucasus, and in what ways might the police and security forces in the region be exacerbating the violence, and what non-military efforts can or should be undertaken to de-escalate or diffuse the multiple tensions in the region?
As I stated in my testimony, Russian policy in the North Caucasus is mostly based on the military operations and suppression of the situation. There are new military deployments, military troops deployed in the Republic of Dagestan. There are struggles between the police and the FSB and other special forces, between the rebels and the Russian federal forces. However, the situation doesn't seem to improve. The Russian security forces are successful in a way of killing, identifying and targeting and killing individuals, but it doesn't help the general situation. There is no window of opportunity for social lift for local youth, so they mostly turn to the radicalization. And that is one of the main problems. As I said in my testimony, there is a very important rule for the West because Russia tries to isolate this region from the rest of the world, and there are countries around Russia, the members of former Soviet Union, now new democracies such Georgia or Baltics, that can be can serve as windows for this region, for educational programs, for professional education, for in all levels of society, and I think that is where the West can focus its attention and efforts. Also, I would recommend to focus on Sochi Olympic Games and all the events happening around this project, which is a project of personal pride for President Vladimir Putin. Yesterday I had guests at the Voice of America. They came from Sochi region. They're green activists. Two of their activists are under criminal investigation for working in this green movement, especially in Sochi. So Sochi Olympic Games, in terms of security, in terms of human rights violation, in terms of corruption and criminalization of the Olympic Games, should be in the center of the attention. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank all of you for your testimony, and I just want to say for the record, the purpose of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission is to focus on the issue of human rights, and sometimes it not always results in making foreign governments feel uncomfortable. Sometimes it makes our own government feel uncomfortable. I think it is correct to say that on the issue of Russia that there are some, even in our own administration, who would would try to avoid making any waves. And I understand that impulse. We all want to get along. But when it comes to human rights, when it comes to people being murdered or tortured, it just, people can't stay silent. Governments can't stay silent. And so, we will continue to hold hearings on this issue again and again and again until no longer there is any need to. And I hope that that is sooner rather than later. And it is because of the work that you have done in providing us information about what is happening on the ground in Russia, because of the information that you have provided us about individual cases like the cases of Sergei Magnitsky. Tomorrow we are going to pass a PNTR for Russia bill that has attached to it probably the most significant human rights legislation attached to any trade bill since I have been in Congress. And that is a big deal. Hopefully we will, pass that in the Senate in an expeditious fashion, and then we get down to the business of making sure that the administration implements that legislation. And I hope and expect that they will, but there will be bipartisan checks and balances in place to make sure that they do. This issue doesn't go away because of the passage of the Sergei Magnitsky Accountability Act. The issues that you talked about go well beyond the Magnitsky case, and so there's a lot more for us to do. But, I think I'll close by just saying I really appreciate the work that you're doing, because in some cases you're risking your life, and it is not easy, but it is essential. And and I always tell people that put yourself in the place of some of the individuals that you have talked about here today, who have been mistreated. If I were in that place, I would hope that there are some people in my country and around the world who would care enough to at least notice, but care even more to do something. And so I appreciate your being here and look forward to working with you in the weeks, months, and years ahead. Thank you very much.